Hello and thanks for visiting our website, rebuilderinabox.com. This video is on the 10MT old school Chevy starter. Comes in high torque and low torque. Here we have a couple different versions of the 10MT. You can see the difference, about 1.5 inches in the long neck from where the shoulder comes down to the end of the starter, and the earlier models, which are about 1 inch from where the shoulder comes down to the end of the end plate. This is a low torque because the lead of the housing comes out below the shoulder. On the long nuts, they all come out above the shoulder. This one is a high torque. This one is actually a low torque because of the width of the field lead that's coming out of the housing. This one here is actually about 1/4 inch, so that makes it a low torque. But this one here is the actual high torque because the field lead coming out, sometimes there's two, and if it's been replaced, depending on the aftermarket, or there may be one, but the actual first field lead coming out will only be 3/8. Solenoid's already been removed, and we're going to take the back plate off. What it is, this is the hanger bolt on top, where sometimes there's a bracket mounted to the block or to the frame. Take a 3/8 socket and a ratchet and remove both those bolts. So we got the bolts out. I'm going to take the end plate off. If it's stuck on there, give it a tap on the top with a hammer and it comes right off. So we're going to remove the nose piece. It fits on with a hook arm fork that goes around the opening in the Bendix. Pull the armature out of the housing. So we have housing, armature, and nose cone. We're going to stick the armature in a vise. Then we have to remove these 3 pieces from the shaft, which keeps the Bendix on. The first piece to take off is the top, or the lid. Then we remove the retainer ring, or a cup-shaped cover, and then the actual retainer ring itself. And here's how we're going to take it off. The lid comes off just straight off the top. It's got a part that sticks out, like a small lid on it, and that goes down so that it fits into the cup. Then you take a pair of channel locks and tap down on the outside of the retainer cup so that it falls down out of the way. Take the channel locks and open them up a little bit. Push the snap ring over to one side and then stretch it up and take it off. Then the retainer cup and the Bendix comes right off. To perform service to the armature, we take some sandpaper, clean up the copper areas, inspect the bars, make sure that there's no pollutants down inside the lines if they've been undercut. Usually they haven't been undercut, there's insulation in there. Polish the shaft on both ends. To put the new Bendix back on the shaft after it's been polished with Scotch-Brite or sandpaper, put a couple drops of oil on it, just 10 WD-40. Put the new Bendix on. Then put on the cup, the retainer cup, with the opening facing up. Put the snap ring on top of the shaft and set it exactly on the top. Then take a 7/16 6-point socket, set it on top of the snap ring, and start it down onto the shaft. Then you take a pair of channel locks, open it up to the proper size of the shaft, put it onto the started snap ring, and tap it down into the groove. Then we're going to push the snap ring all the way over to one side. Then I'm putting the channel locks like so. The top half of the jaw is on the top of the shaft and the bottom is on the retainer ring in the area that I pushed the snap ring all the way over to one side. Then snap up on it so that the side that you pushed all the way over on the snap ring goes up into the cup. Then turn it around and roll the rest of it in like this. Turning the snap ring retainer with your fingers and pushing the snap ring down in with the tip of the channel locks. Then you put the lid on with the extrusion part down. Put a small dab of lithium grease on it. And then put the leather spacer on the back. Take a center punch and tap right in the middle of the top of the nose cone. Drill that hole out with a 1/4 inch drill. Then drill it with a 1/2 inch drill. Then take a 1/4 inch by 6 inch extension, hold it over top of the hole and drive the bushing out. Here's a side view of how we're going to install the new bushing. We flipped the nose cone over and clamped it in the vise. Then we're going to use a 3/8 extension turned upside down. Set the bushing in the hole as straightly as you possibly can, and then just tap it in gently with the 3/8 extension and the hammer. Now we're going to raise the fork to the upward position, put it towards you, put the nose cone in a vise, hold the armature in one hand and hold the plunger so that it stays up in the other hand, and stick the Bendix in so that the fork goes into position on the Bendix. Pull the plunger up and down to make sure that you have free travel on the Bendix going back and forth on the shaft. Now we have 2 pins that we have to remove to put new brushes in the housing. There's one, just prime up with a screwdriver. They come all the way out. And as you pull them out of the retainers, you'll see the V-shaped springs. Then we have 4 brushes exposed. 2 hot ones that are in the plastic brush holders and 2 ground ones that are in the metal brush holders. Then you can either take all 4 brushes out. For demonstration purposes, we're going to show you how to do one. This is the ground brush, and then we're going to show you how to do one of the hot brushes. Sometimes there'll be Phillips holding them in. This screw right here. Just take it out. And sometimes there'll be slotted heads. Let's take a couple minutes and talk about installing the new brushes into the plastic and metal brush holders. If you look very closely at the brush holder itself, in this corner, as we've illustrated here, and here's the hole that goes through, there's a 90-degree corner. However, and I've never had anybody explain to me why, but the bottom of the brush itself, it's not a 90-degree corner that fits into the brush holder. It's about 10 degrees off. And we have to install the brush so that that 10-degree corner becomes a gap in that area there, so that when it's properly installed and the Phillips head screw is inserted in this area here, there's a gap in this corner. This would be installed wrong because the gap is towards the outside. And when it's installed properly, as in the previous picture, the gap is on the inside. A little bit of a challenge here, putting the brushes back into their holders. What we're going to do is squeeze the metal one down so that when you put it over top of the plastic brush holder, it's got a little bit of spring tension to it and it holds the holes lined up. Then you put the V-spring on it and stick it under there and put the pin through. One very important step here, after the brushes are installed, flip it over and look underneath. You'll notice that the wire going to the plastic brush holder, the hot brush, is on the inside of the pin. It has to be tucked back out of the way so that it doesn't rub on the armature and go on the outside of the pin. And the pin is long enough to hold the wire back out of the way, and it'll stay. Here we're checking the rear bushing, the bushing that's in the rear plate. And what we're doing is rocking it back and forth as we spin it, because you don't have to change a pretty high percentage of these. Just put a little bit of dielectric grease or lithium grease on the inside of it. And actually this amount of play right here is not only good but desirable, because when you install the new bushing, you actually have to take a hammer and tap it in so that you do have a little bit of play going back and forth. However, if you do need to change it, we're going to clamp her down tightly in a vise. And what we want to do to remove the bushing is chisel a line like the two lines I have drawn in the old bushing while it's still in the end plate. And the tool that you want to use is something similar to this. It's a flat chisel with a pointy bevel on the edge of it, but we thinned it down a little bit from the outside, from the longest rectangular portion. And you just put it on one side of the bushing and start tapping away so that there's stock removed all the way down to the bottom of the bushing. Then once you get that, you use the same tool and go to the other side and start doing the same thing 180 degrees away, and the bushing just falls right out because you've relieved all the tension from the outside diameter. Then we're going to install the new bushing much in the same way that we did in the nose cone. Set the bushing in there so that it's straight, then use a 3/8 extension Tap it gently around the outside edges and make sure that it's going in straight. Then finish tapping it in. And I think I already told you this, but this is where we have to do it. The bushing has to be broke in. Tap it down on there. And then tap around the outside edges. So that you get a free spin. Then put some white lithium grease up inside the hole. If you look closely, you'll notice the line-up pin on the outside diameter of the housing and the line-up hole in the aluminum housing. You want to spread the spring and brushes apart so you can begin setting it down on the armature. Just get them as far apart as you can with your thumbs and kind of start one side at a time to get it down over the commutator. Kind of get it about that far down on there to where maybe 2 of the brushes are on but 2 aren't, they're almost on, and then pause and look at it, because you have to take your time and have patience and put it on carefully so that you don't break the plastic brush holders. Okay, now we got it on all the way. The pin is lined up in the nose cone. I'm going to take a hammer, tap around the outside edge, and then take a screwdriver and pry in between the housing and the brushes so that the brushes ride flat. So we're putting the lid on, making sure that the leather spacer was in there already. Line up the bolts and tighten them up. Remember, the hanger bolt goes on top for Chevy, and if you have an old school Oldsmobile, they go on the bottom. Tighten up the bolts with a 3/8. You also have to be a little bit cautious when you're putting the solenoid on that the return spring doesn't walk its way onto the top of the plunger, because when you put this in there, there's a lip on the solenoid, so you have to get that on, line it up, and then twist the solenoid into position. And the idea is put the coil spring on so that when you're twisting it on, it rotates in a direction that won't allow itself to walk up onto the plunger. To test the starter, lay it in front of a car and run a pair of jumper cables down from the battery. The red cable goes to positive and it goes on the main copper terminal, this one right here. Then put the ground side either on the solenoid somewhere or in the front of the starter. Then when we are ready to run the starter, you bridge the connection from the hot cable over to the S terminal with a small pocket screwdriver. One of them's marked R and one of them is marked S. This one's marked S, and so you want to take a small pocket screwdriver and stick it in between those two. Start with a series of short bursts. And what we're really testing is we want to see that the solenoid pulls the Bendix back and forth very quickly. It should snap right out and snap right back. Hold on to it firmly or put your foot on it, because the starter is going to want to kick whenever you turn it on. Keep all your tools and fingers away from this area right here. But what you're viewing is that the Bendix gear snaps out and snaps back quickly. Then let it run, and it sounds like this. Sometimes the bushings need broken a little bit. You can take a hammer and tap lightly in this area right here, and this area right here where the bushings are. And if the starter achieves the RPM and the same smoothness of sound like this, it's good. It's ready to go on the car. Don't torque it up for more than 10 seconds straight. You don't want to let it free run and spin itself to death.